Good evening. Welcome to the Kennedy School of Government. Welcome to the ARCO Forum. My name is Joe McCarthy. I'm Associate Dean and Director of the degree programs here at the Kennedy School. And I'd like to welcome you to this evening's forum. I would also particularly like to welcome this evening's speaker, the Honorable George Ryan, who until January of this year was Governor of the state of Illinois. Governor Ryan came to national attention in the year 2000 when he declared a moratorium on the death penalty in the state of Illinois. And later, when as one of his final official acts in office, he commuted the sentences of the 156 inmates on death row in his state. His actions and the explanations he gave have sparked a heated debate both within his party, the Republican Party, and across the nation and around the world. Governor Ryan has said that our capital system is haunted by the demon of error. Error in determining guilt, error in determining who among the guilty deserves to die, what effect was race having, what effect was poverty having. Given the disproportionate representation of economically disadvantaged African Americans and Latinos among the 839 individuals executed since the death penalty was reinstated by the Supreme Court in 1976, Governor Ryan has also characterized this as one of the great civil rights struggles of our time. This has also been labeled as a human rights issue that places this country in dubious company around the world, and Governor Ryan will say a bit more about that in his remarks. At the Kennedy School of Government, we claim that our mission is to train public leaders and to solve pressing public policy problems. I ask you to consider with me what it takes for a public leader to depart from his party, to depart from perhaps many of his constituents, those who have supported him over many years, to take a stand based on principle, a perhaps unpopular stand because he believes it to be the right thing to do. It's the sort of question we should be considering here every day. To discuss this and to discuss the death penalty further, as well as his dramatic and controversial decisions regarding the issue, please join me in welcoming Governor Ryan to the podium.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Dean McCarthy. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks to you folks for being here this evening. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the former Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman, who's president of the Institute here, but I had lunch with him today, and as you know, it's Passover, and he went home to be with his family. But we had a nice discussion at lunch, and I wanted to say a special thanks to him for the invitation. I want to thank Bill White, the Forum Director, for the courtesies that he's shown me here during my stay, and I want to thank all of you folks for being a part of this. I'm delighted to be invited back to Harvard. I'm here tonight because the capital punishment system just doesn't work. And I feel that the future of America in this area and in every area is in your hands. You're what it's all about. I'm an old guy. My time is passing. I don't know whether we'll be able to change this system in my day or not, but I feel obligated to deliver a message. And you can do what you want with the message. You can either be converted if you're anti, or you can be converted if you're pro, or whatever. But I just wanted to come and talk about it. Our system should either be repaired or it should be repealed. And I'm not sure that it can be repaired at this point. And that's especially true in my home state of Illinois. And if you're poor and you're a minority, the system is absolutely stacked against you. You don't have a pro. Now, I want to take just a minute and give you a little background about where I started and where I come from in this whole situation. I was raised in a little town called Kankakee, Illinois, that's about 60 miles from Chicago. And it's more than 60 miles in culture and thoughts about lifestyles. It's a lot farther than 60 miles. It's a little agricultural community of about 35,000 people. We had some industry there, very conservative, Republican community. The county was Republican. I was a Republican. And I was raised there. My father was in the pharmacy business. And we had some drugstores. And I went to pharmacy school. My brother was a pharmacist. My sister married one. My dad was. So we all had a store in Kankakee, 34,000 people. We had 4 stores there. So we had the opportunity to meet and talk to a lot of people. But most of the people in my town, like me, never had a reason to discuss the death penalty or to have any thoughts about it. And I'm sure that's probably true with a lot of you folks that sit here tonight. I don't think any of you have probably been too impacted by or your family by the death penalty. And so when I was brought up, the death penalty was one of those things that was there. It was a system that was in place for bad people. Bad people got thrown into jail. Worse people got executed. And when they talked about people, innocent people, being executed, that was the stuff of Hollywood. But we never even gave it a second thought. We watched it on the news, so we heard it and read it in the newspapers, but it didn't impact us personally. And I got to tell you that I've been in public life for about 35 years, and I've run several times for statewide office. Never once in my entire elective political career did anybody ask me where I stood on the death penalty. Not the press, not my opponents. Nobody said, what's your opinion of it? Do you have an opinion? Are you for it or against it? It was never brought up. I ran for governor of the state of Illinois and never once openly discussed the death penalty. I got elected to the Illinois House of Representatives. And I went to Springfield, Illinois as a member of the House. My 3rd term, I got elected minority leader of the House. That was in 1977. As the dean pointed out, in 76, the United States Supreme Court said it was okay for states to reinstitute the death penalty if they followed certain criteria. So sure enough, we had some eager folks that wanted to reintroduce the death penalty in Illinois, and they brought it to the floor of the House, introduced it, and I voted for it. And during the course of the debate, there was a fellow on the opposite side of the issue stood up and said, those of you that vote green here today, how many of you would be willing to throw the switch? Electrocution in those days. I said to myself, that's kind of a sobering thought. I don't think I'd want to be the executioner. I don't think I'd want to throw the switch, but the death penalty is an important part of the system, so I voted for it. And it passed, and it became law in Illinois. And little did I know that some 20 years later, I would be the executioner as governor of the state of Illinois. And that's when I sat up and started to take some thoughts, some ideas, and some information about the death penalty in Illinois. Let me give you a little history about the Illinois death penalty. We put the new law in 1977. 10 years later, there were 2 fellows, a guy by the name of Perry Cobb and one by the name of Darby Tillis, that were acquitted of a double murder. And they were the first 2 men to be exonerated that had been sent to prison to die by a jury without a reasonable doubt, and had been through the whole process of the appellate courts and the system only to say you're absolutely guilty. But they were exonerated and turned loose. 7 years later, in 1994, a fellow by the name of Joseph Burroughs was released from death row when a co-defendant of his recanted her testimony against him in the murder of a downstate man during a robbery attempt. In 1995, the DuPage County judge acquitted a fellow by the name of Rolando Cruz, a very celebrated case, and you may have read about it or know about it. Maybe some of you are too young. Rolando Cruz and a fellow by the name of Alex Hernandez were charged with the kidnap, the rape, and the murder of a little 10-year-old girl by the name of Janine Nicarico. They were on their 4th retrial for Cruz when he was, when key investigators in the county of DuPage determined that they should change their story because it was contrived. And then came DNA, and it exonerated both of them. But they spent a long time in prison and were facing the death penalty. They were innocent. In 1996, a fellow by the name of Carl Lawson was convicted in a 1990 murder of an East St. Louis, a little boy in East St. Louis, and he was acquitted, found not guilty for some reason or another. A case in 1996 involving a fellow by the name of Gary Gauger. He was convicted of the murder of his parents. And it's a very interesting story that I don't have time to go into here. But he was a case suspect. He was a kind of a dope head that lived with his mother and dad on a farm, and they sold motorcycle parts on the side to motorcycle gangs. And he went home one night, or found out that his mother and dad weren't there, and woke up the next morning to find that they'd been killed and their throats slit. Who was the first suspect? Gary Gauger, of course, the son. And they convicted him, tried him, convicted him, and he was found guilty and put on death row, only to have alcohol and tobacco and firearms people pick up on a wire someplace from a motorcycle gang in Wisconsin that they were joking about how they'd never have to face the charges against the murder that they'd committed, and the kid was taking the rap for the murder of his parents. He was exonerated. 1996, a guy by the name of Repeal Jimerson and Dennis Williams were two of a group called the Ford Heights Four that were convicted in the murder of a couple in a 1978 crime, and they were sentenced to die. And they were all four cleared of DNA evidence. By that time, that was 9 people that had been sent to jails to die by the state that were absolutely innocent. I got elected governor in January of '99. In February of 1999, I was sitting in a mansion in Springfield, Illinois, watching the news with my wife. They said, Anthony Porter has been freed from death row. Anthony Porter was an African-American, retarded, had no business being on death row based on his IQ. And he had a couple of lawyers, some students, not law students, not anybody that had anything to do with the justice system, journalism students. His lawyers went to the court and they said, you can't execute this man 48 hours before the execution. The state had measured him for his suit, and we got his order for his last meal. And the court said, okay, you're right. We'll give you a stay of execution. The journalism students went to work. They found the witness, the eyewitness that said she saw, without question, Anthony Porter commit the murder. She recanted her testimony and said, I lied. I didn't do it. They hired a private detective. This is in Milwaukee. Private detective went out and found the killer, a guy by the name of Al Story Simon, and he confessed on videotape that he was the murderer, and Anthony Porter was released from jail. And when I watched the television news that night, I said to myself, why is a man like that even on death row? Anthony Porter was a kind of a likable guy. I mean, a guy you kind of like. He smiled a lot. But you didn't have to be it just took a couple of seconds to look at him to know that he had a problem. He had long curly hair, and he wore a stove-type hat, an Abe Lincoln-type hat, when he was released from jail. He was happy to be out of jail. I'm not sure that he ever really understood why he was in jail. I know that he didn't participate in his own defense because he wasn't capable of doing that. Now, what kind of a system puts those kind of people behind bars and puts them on death row? A system that's faulty and a system that's wrong. So that was in January of 1999, in February of '99. Anthony Porter had spent 16 years on death row as an innocent individual. And so after his release, the Chicago newspapers asked me about a moratorium on executions, and I said I wasn't ready to do that, but I'd certainly look at it. In February of '99, a fellow by the name of Steve Smith became the 11th death row inmate to be exonerated. And they vacated his sentence and barred a retrial because the prosecutor against Smith, an off-duty prison guard, the witness was a drug-addicted fellow that said they were guilty. In March of 1997, I got my first case as governor to come to sign off for an execution. was a Greek fellow by the name of Andrew Korkialis. He was a terrible guy. He used to drive down the streets of Chicago, but in this particular case, he grabbed a young woman off the streets of Chicago, he murdered her, raped her, mutilated her, and threw her back out on the street. He was found guilty, convicted, found guilty, and sent to death row. And it was time for him to be executed, and it came to me to sign off. The Supreme Court said we're going to execute on this date. I said we got to wait. I just found 11 people that there was no question about their guilt that almost died at the hand of the state that were absolutely innocent. And I'm not going to jump into the Andrew Korkialis case. By that time, I had the Greek church all over me, saying on moral grounds that we shouldn't kill him. They didn't want their state or any government agency involved in the business of death. And they were right. And so I spent a good deal of time anguishing over Anthony Korkialis. And in the end, I realized that he was guilty without a doubt in my mind. And I allowed the execution to continue. And it has bothered me ever since the day that I did that. But I thought it was the right thing to do at that time. And so, in November of 1999, to add to my woes and everybody else's, the Chicago Tribune does a series of stories saying how faulty the system in Illinois really is and what the problem is. And so they talked about half of the nearly 300 capital cases that had been reversed for a new trial or a resentencing hearing in the state of Illinois. 300 cases, half of them resentenced because there was some problem with the process. 33 death row inmates had been represented at trial by an attorney who had later been disbarred or suspended from the practice of law. Some of them came in and slept through the hearings. Some came in drunk. Some came in without any knowledge of the case at all. And for the life of me, I don't understand how a judge that sits on the bench can allow that to happen in his courtroom. I don't know how that can happen, but it did 33 times in Illinois. 35 African-American death row inmates were convicted or condemned by an all-white jury. We decided that it was time to put a stop to some of this. Jailhouse informants convicted 46 death row inmates. People that say, the prosecutor says, tell me something about him, and we'll give you a get out of jail early card. You get out 6 months early. So what are you going to do? You're going to tell him a lot of stuff that may not be true. And the prosecutors are delighted. He's going to get electrocuted, and you're going to get out 6 months early, or whatever the deal is. So I said we got to stop the killing now, and I called for a moratorium, and we stopped it. And I said until I can be certain with a moral certainty that the death penalty works right in Illinois, there'll be no more killings as long as I'm governor. That was in January of 2000. I appointed a commission made up of some very great people, good people, former United States prosecutors, trial lawyers, defense bar, people from Illinois, the public defender's office, the prosecutor's office. Put 13, I had former Senator Paul Simon on there, United States Attorney Tom Sullivan, former federal judge Frank McGarr. We had people that sat and spent 2 years studying 171 cases on Illinois' death row. Even the people that had been exonerated went back and studied, spent 2 years to do it. And they came up with 85 recommendations on change to improve the Illinois law. But they said, we can't guarantee that you still won't have innocent people convicted, but this will help reduce the possibility if you can make these changes. And so my position started to change when a fellow by the name of Anthony Porter was released from prison back in 1999. And when that happened, I didn't quite frankly know what to think, because I did believe in the system. And I did have a lot of questions about it. But I changed my mind, and I called for a moratorium. And as I said, it was journalism students that saved Anthony Porter's life. be dead today if it hadn't been for those kids that did what they did. It wasn't the judicial system or the criminal justice system. It was journalism students, young people like you are here, that took up the cause and carried the banner and did the job. And that's why I'm on this circuit. I've been in public life for 30 years, and I'm ready to go home and plant tulips or whatever. But I feel an obligation to talk to young people like you because you're the future of what this is all about. You're the journalism students from Northwestern, and you're all over America. And you've got to have it in your heart, and you've got to have the compassion, and most of you do. You owe yourself and you owe your society an obligation to study this system, to look at it, to call on your state representatives and your state senators and your congressmen and your governors to have a look at their system, to reflect, at least to study it. Because I can't believe that Illinois is the only state that has a flawed system. And I haven't seen too much progress in other states. I've talked about the Corchialis case and what he did. And I just have never really rested since I did that. It was probably one of the toughest decisions that I had to make. I had to make a decision to take another man's life. And I don't know what gave me the privilege to do that other than the fact that I had been elected governor of the state of Illinois. And it continues to gnaw at me as I continue to learn more about how bad our system in Illinois is. But at this point, the 85 people, or the 85 recommendations that we had made to the General Assembly still languish in the Illinois General Assembly. The Commission came out with a report 1 year ago this week, and we're talking about life and death. And I'm a Republican. The Senate in Illinois was controlled by Republicans. I don't think this is a political issue, but I'm just telling you that they let those bills die in a committee. Now we got a new governor and a new leader in the Senate. We got a Democrat-controlled leader. Got an African-American who I served in the House with by the name of Emil Jones, who's the new president of the Senate. And his mission is to help pass as many of those reforms as he can. We had a bill that was introduced to abolish the death penalty in Illinois. And for a lack of support, the sponsor pulled it. They're going to see if they can't pass some of these recommendations. I don't think they'll pass all of my recommendations, only from pride of authorship or whatever that most representatives in the Assembly have, or senators. But I do believe we'll get some of them done. And I think it'll make a difference. Now, there are many cases about wrongfully convicted people and how they have spent their years of life in prison as innocent people. And I can't imagine going through those kinds of sitting in prison, being convicted of killing your parents when you know you're innocent. That's tough stuff. Pretty wrenching. But the case were reviewed by everybody that was on death row and had been exonerated by our commission, and they made those recommendations. But I guess one of my great regrets is that I had a lot of successes legislatively in my term in government, but the one big failure that I've had has been that I wasn't able to change and pass laws to help the capital punishment system in Illinois. But I believe that'll probably happen. There's a lot of situations around, but I think we in America need to understand what our system is about. And the dean pointed out the kind of company we're in as a country in the world. We're the third largest executor in the world. We're behind China and the Congo. Europe doesn't have the death penalty, and I didn't know that till I got involved in it. Canada doesn't have it. Mexico doesn't have it. Most of the Central and South American countries don't have it. But good old America is right up there, number 3. I can't believe that our system is perfect, and I believe that we've probably executed a lot of innocent people. Somebody said to me one day, you know, it's 99% okay. So I don't want to be in that 1%, I can tell you that. 99% is not good enough. It's not good enough for a system in a country like ours, where we should be the beacon of hope, the light that lights the way for the rest of the world in human rights issues. And this is certainly a human rights issue. We have to be able to, without question, separate the guilty from the innocent if we're going to kill them. So that all was a part of my journey as an avid supporter of the capital punishment system to someone who believes that the criminal justice system needs a complete overhaul. The system is arbitrary, it's capricious, it's unjust, it's racist, it's unfair. And to the poor families, it's even treated the victims' families very poorly. Now, I've heard and had public hearings before I made my decision. I commuted 167 men, and all men, that were on death row in Illinois, and 4 other men I pardoned outright. The 4 that I pardoned outright had nothing in common. They had all, other than the fact that they'd all been tortured to confess. And the only evidence that took them to death row was the fact that they had signed a confession after being tortured to confess. They were bagged for one of our famous police districts in Chicago, a lieutenant by the name of John Burge, who's retired in Florida now, notoriously had a record. The police department fired him. They investigated him and said he was guilty of all the things that happened, but he's never been charged. Take a typewriter bag and stick it over a man's head till he passes out. He can't breathe, and then pull it off and stick him with a cattle prod or something to wake him up and make him sign a confession. There's a fellow by the name of Anthony Patterson who signed the confession after going through that treatment. And he scratched with a paper clip on the seat, the bench, the wooden bench, when they gave him a little break. I was tortured to confess. And he scratched it on the wall next to the door. I think it was still there when the police investigated the problem. But these folks one guy spent 20 years in prison. One of those 4. They're all out free today. But the 167 that I commuted are still in jail, and they're going to be in jail because for what I know, they're all guilty of hardcore crimes. But if they can prove their innocence, they'll get out. But they won't be executed if they're innocent. They'll still have an opportunity. And I commuted everybody that was on death row. And as we speak now, in Illinois, death row is starting to fill up again. Moratorium is still on. The new governor has said he's going to keep it on, but there's no attempt to make the system better. But as we speak, my decision to commute is being challenged by prosecutors back in Illinois. Now, there's a lot of things that can be said here tonight, and I'm on a 20-minute schedule, and I'm already over that, I believe. But I think that they talked about the courage. It wasn't a courageous thing I did. I didn't have any choice, frankly. How do you line people up, innocent people, and send them off to die in a chamber as a government and say, I didn't see it? It was the only thing I could do. It was the right thing to do. So I don't like to be called courageous because I'm not. And my confrontation with the death penalty brought out a lot of strong reactions from a lot of people. Most people believe if we're going to have a death penalty, everybody I've ever talked to, it ought to be fair, it ought to be equal, it ought to be just. That's the American way. Our system is none of those things at this time. And so I did what I had to do so I could live with myself. I made a decision that I didn't believe was going to haunt me the rest of my life, like I did on the Anthony Corchialis case. I said, if nobody's going to pay any attention and make any changes in our laws, then I'm not going to leave all these people on death row. And so that's what I did. I want to thank all of you once again for giving me the opportunity to come here and speak. I spoke at Brown University last night and had another group of fine young people to talk to. But I can't emphasize enough about you people. You know, there's a lot of leaders that come out of Harvard University with one degree or another. And you don't have to be a lawyer. A lot of you will be. Some of you will probably be prosecutors. Some of you may be defenders. Some of you may practice corporate law. Some of you may not even be lawyers. You may be sports agents or something. Who knows? That's where the money is. But you've got an obligation to look at this system, to get other people to look at this system and to be in it. And I can't emphasize that enough. I'm going to go out next week to the West Coast and talk to some of the universities there. I did it 2 years ago, and I'm going back. So I'm sure you're all going to do what you think is right. You're going to do like I did. You're going to do the right thing. But the dean's a little nervous, and I don't like to make deans nervous. Thanks for your time very much.
Not at all nervous. I'm inspired, and I'd like to thank you, Governor, for not going right away to plant tulips and for planting these other seeds at Brown, at Harvard, and at other colleges. Now, in the custom of the ARCO Forum at the Kennedy School, we will entertain some questions. And in our custom, we will ask you to identify yourself first, and to put the question as briefly as you can and make it a question, not a statement. Thank you. And we will begin going around the room in a counterclockwise fashion with the lady to my right. There are microphones on the floor and microphones up in the mezzanine as well. So, Governor, I'll let you take over again.
Thanks, Dean. Let me ask, before we go to the questions, how many people are from Illinois? Okay, I met with a lot of them before we met. You know, there was a fellow by the name of Tip O'Neill. I think he's probably well known in these parts. Tip O'Neill always said all politics is local. So you always want to make sure you touch base, although I'm not a candidate for it. Just in my genes. I can't help it. Go ahead.
Good evening, Governor Ryan. My name is Sandhya Ramadas. I'm a senior at the college. I'd like to thank you for coming tonight and for everything that you've done to increase awareness about the death penalty. My question is that you spoke of the death penalty as a human rights issue and listed many cases where innocent people were convicted. And I'd actually like to hear your thoughts about the human rights issue of someone who is guilty and whether or not they deserve the penalty in and of itself.
Well, I believed in the death penalty, and I'm still kind of arguing with myself about whether it ought to be abolished, frankly. There may be an occasion when the death penalty should be around. That's an issue that I haven't resolved within myself. Hopefully I'll get there. But the more I see how bad the system is, the more I see the abuses in the system, from the prosecutors to whomever's involved, to the deals that are cut, to convict, the more I'm starting to feel that abolition may be the only way. There are 13, I think 12 or 13 states that don't have the death penalty in America. And I don't think that the death penalty acts as a deterrent. Maybe it does, but I have never seen where it has. And I can cite a lot of cases about that. But certainly guilty people should pay the price. But I don't know if death is the answer, and I don't know if government should be the people that make that determination. I'll tell you a quick story. It involves a personal friend of mine in my little town of Kankakee who was kidnapped, captured, buried alive, and died for $1 million ransom. And it happened from another fellow in a family that lived in my same little town. His name was Danny Edwards, was the fellow that committed the crime, and the fellow that got killed was Steve Small, and he lived right next door to me. Had a lot of money. And Danny Edwards thought he could get some of it if he kidnapped him and called for a ransom. Well, he died. Danny Edwards got caught, went to jail, convicted, sentenced to death. When I started to talk about the death sentence and commutation, I got a letter from Danny Edwards. Now, I know his family, and I know the other family. I mean, a little town like Kankakee, everybody knows everybody. And his letter to me was that he didn't want me to commute his sentence. He wanted me to leave him on death row. He would take his chances because he was innocent, and I knew he was innocent, and he should stay on death row where he could get a chance to exonerate himself through the criminal justice system. I never replied to the letter. When I started to talk about the capital punishment system and commutation seriously, I got another letter from Danny. Danny said, Governor, I didn't realize that you had the kind of power you have, and that you had the authority to not only commute sentences, but you can pardon people as well. People that are pardoned walk away from jail free people. You know I'm innocent. You ought to pardon me and my girlfriend, who was convicted with him, and let us travel with you so we could talk about what it's like to be on death row as innocent people. But if you can't do that, don't commute my sentence. Leave me on death row. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in an 8-by-12 cell, 23 hours a day. That's worse than anything I can think about. So leave me on death row and don't commute my sentence. Needless to say, he's going through what he doesn't want to go through right now. I don't think there's any question about his guilt. He's guilty. But I'm not sure, as I said, whether we ought to kill him or not. I think 23 hours a day in a prison, and I visited a lot of prisons in my day, is any fun at all, frankly. I think it would be very difficult to live that way for the rest of your life, and he's a young man.
Thank you.
Gentleman up here in the mezzanine.
Hello, I'm Patrick Smith. I'm a junior with the college from Chicago, Illinois. So, woohoo, go Chicago.
Is that a White Sox hat you have on? Or?
A Blackhawks hat.
Oh, Blackhawks.
My question is, how much is this a litmus test issue for you when it comes to electing officials, Democrat or Republican? Do you think that their stance on this issue is sort of like the first thing we should look at? For example, Lisa Madigan and Joe Burkett, who ran for the Attorney General's office in Illinois last year. Joe Burkett was in favor of keeping the death penalty as it stands, and Lisa Madigan was in favor of reforming it. Do you think that that should convince Republicans as well? You know, and if the situation was reversed, should that convince Democrats to vote for the Republican candidate? I was just wondering what you felt about that.
Well, I'm not sure what your question is.
My question is do you think that people should make this their first and most important issue when they go to vote for a candidate, and sort of like, do you think Democrats should vote for Republicans who are against the death penalty or in favor of reforming the death penalty? And
I think they ought to vote who they think is the right person going to do the best job for them, but they certainly ought to know their views on the issues. I said earlier, I don't know whether you heard me or not, that in all the years that I ran for public office, nobody challenged my position on the death penalty. Nobody asked about it. Nobody questioned it. I think I have an obligation to do that. Although I think that without question, politics, not politics as politics, but it's good politics to be tough against crime, to show you're not soft on crime, and that's Democrats and Republicans as well. And so they're very cautious about the stand that they take. And back when before 9/11, when you took a poll to ask about the death penalty, the numbers were pretty, they had started to come down. They used to be pretty strong about the death penalty, and they started to come down. After 9/11, they all went back up again. People thought that crimes had been committed and terrorists ought to be executed and those kind of things. But if you ask the question, the death penalty or life in prison without parole, the numbers come out about even. And so people, I want a system that's fair. I want a system that's just. It's really the American way, frankly. And I think that those of people that hold public office have an obligation to look at an issue like this, which is really a civil rights issue, not only for Illinois, but for the whole country. And we have an obligation to try and correct that system any place if it needs to be corrected. And I can't believe Illinois is the only place where it's faulted. Bill.
Thank you, Governor. My name is Bill McCamley. I'm a second-year public policy student here at the Kennedy School from Las Cruces, New Mexico. And my question is basically a follow-up on the last one. It seems that when you're running, if you are asked in an election what you think on the death penalty or crime in general, if you advocate for any sort of reform or any sort of abolishing the death penalty, you're soft on crime. I think I even remember Bill Clinton in 1992 when he was in the primary elections flying back to Arkansas and executing someone to prove he was tough on crime.
Right.
So my question is, as a politician...
I'm not a politician anymore.
You were for a long time. Think back on those days fondly. What has to be done politically? Is public opinion going to have to change for this to happen, or are people just going to have to face really tough re-elections if public opinion, like you just said, is so in favor of this, and it's so easy to attack someone based on the soft on crime issue?
I'm glad you asked, because that's why I'm here, is to educate people about the process of the death penalty. People don't know it. They don't understand it. I said it earlier. It's never affected their life. They haven't been affected by it in any fashion. Probably most people here. They may know somebody, but probably not. It's been sent to prison for a horrendous crime of some kind. So it's an educational process. And once the public is educated about it, people have an understanding about it, it'll happen. I think we'll eventually abolish the death penalty in America. I think it's down the road, but I think it'll happen. But in the meantime, we have to lay the groundwork to educate the people to do that. And the politicians, of course, will all tell you that they're kind of for the death penalty, but they want it to be fair and honest and all of those good things, and that's true. But it is politics, basically, that drives it in public opinion.
Hi, Governor. My name is Andy Frank. I'm a second year here at the college from Glen Ellen, Illinois. Not exactly Chicago. My question actually sort of has to do a little bit with foreign affairs and how you think this plays into that. A lot of the criticism that the U.S. has is because we, the third largest executor of people. And how do you think that this, if we eventually did abolish the death penalty, how do you think this would play into foreign affairs? And I know that you've played some part in going to Cuba and the such. How do you think that your role as being a death penalty, as being anti-death penalty, has helped you with?
I don't think there's any major international issues that have hinged on our position on the death penalty in America that would affect any big international decision. When I went to Cuba the second time and had dinner with Castro, it was after I had a moratorium, put the moratorium in place. He informed me they had a moratorium in Cuba too. And I read in the paper last week where he executed 3 people that got up and said bad things about him. So he doesn't really have a moratorium there. I don't know if it has any international. I think it's shameful for those of us that are Americans and live in a system that's the third largest killer and are associated with countries that really have terrible civil rights rules and laws and regulations in their countries, and we're allies with them. Shouldn't be.
Thank you.
This gentleman over here.
Hello, my name is Eric Weinberger. I teach in the writing program here, and my question, since you say you're no longer a politician, I hope you can answer this candidly, because then you will no longer be beholden to Republicans like the president. But it
You're
occurs to me.
assuming that, of course.
Excuse me?
You're assuming that I'm now beholden.
Yes. No.
And you're
no.
a teacher here? You teach the writing course? That's not opposite to the wronging course. Okay, go ahead.
Expository writing. Well, what interests me is that the first 2 years of your term as a Republican governor would have overlapped with George Bush's term as governor of Texas.
What
and I'm wondering
part
if
of that?
the first 2 years of your term must have been the last 2 years of his term. So I'm assuming that you met at Republican governors' conferences, and I'm wondering if you ever discussed the death penalty with him.
No.
No?
That's
Or
not-
any other Republican
No,
governor?
but I know the White House was unhappy when I put the moratorium on, and they were especially unhappy when I commuted. Although I had no direct contact, the message came back. But I didn't care. I mean, it didn't matter.
Unhappy on what grounds if you're acting
Well,
as governor of the state on the state's
they
issue?
face a lot of heat in Texas. Where's my guy from Texas that was with me earlier? Where is that son sitting there somewhere? There he is, right there. I mean, I've been questioned a lot of times during the course when Bush was governor. On the first two years that I was governor, he was governor, and I was always asked about Bush's position on the death penalty because Texas had so many executions. My answer was that each governor has to be comfortable with their own situation, and they have to feel comfortable with it. And he has said on many occasions he doesn't believe that they executed any innocent people, and that he was comfortable that the folks that he executed were guilty, and that's a big part of it. I didn't have that feeling, and that's why I challenged our system. And that's true, I guess, with a lot of governors, that they're comfortable with their own death penalty rules and regulations and laws, and they're all different. You could commit a crime in one state and get a different penalty than you would in another for the same crime. But they have to be comfortable with it, and they obviously are. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, I was wondering, I thought that since you have you could speak freely if you'd spoken to then Governor Bush about this, if maybe.
You see, I'm not here to bash President Bush or any of the other governors that have got the system. I don't know about the Texas system. I don't know how it operates. I don't know what procedures they follow, like I don't know about other states.
Well,
I only know about my own state. And I don't dictate those procedures for people that have been elected to operate their states. And Bush was one of those people. But, that doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with what he says. But I'm not going to go out publicly against him or any other governor.
I just wondered if maybe he'd expressed any doubts about what
Has
the
he?
apparatus.
To me personally?
Yes, maybe.
No.
No, okay.
No, he never had. But it's come back, as I said, through the grapevine, that the White House was unhappy with with some of the things that I've done on the death penalty.
Thank you.
My name is Stephanie. I'm a second-year master's in public policy here. I have a strange question for you.
Yeah. On public policy?
Actually, a personal ideological question. You've called yourself pro-life when you were a politician, and I'm wondering if, in your mind personally, there's any connection between your views on abortion and your views on the death penalty.
I am still pro-life.
And I don't doubt that.
No.
I'm saying that for.
But let me tell you, I've been accused of not being pro-life because when I was governor, there was a bill that came to my desk that said poor women could not get state aid for an abortion based on their health. It only had to be on the life. I was a pharmacist all my life, raised in it. My father was in it. I always was concerned about people's health. I said, how can that be? How can you not have the health as a matter of consideration? And so I vetoed the bill. Now, the whole pro-life community walked away from me and said, hey, the guy's a turncoat. He's changed his position. That's not true. I still am pro-life, but you have to be reasonable. And I made the pledge that I was pro-life when I ran. But you make promises as government officials or as elected officials or as candidates, but you always have to keep one thing in reserve, and that's the right to change your mind when it's necessary to do so. And I've always said that I'm for this position, but I reserve the right to change my mind if conditions change. You can't make a commitment for 4 years and say, I'm absolutely not going to make any change or be involved. You have to, things change, times change, and you have to be flexible.
So is there any connection in your mind as a pro-life politician and your decision about death penalty?
Well, I have noticed that most pro-life people, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of that I've talked to are pro-death people. I don't know how that works, but they're for the death penalty. They're very conservative, what I call the right-wing faction of the Republican Party. Basically, well, I won't go into that. But, yeah, most of the pro-life people I know support the death penalty. And so they're all mad at me. The same group's still mad at me. It's not a bad group to have mad at you, by the way.
Let's take Terrence's question up here and then.
Terrence.
Hi, good afternoon, Governor. Terrence Gilchrist, first-year Master of Public Policy student here at the Kennedy School. We know that the criminal justice system disproportionately impacts the Black and Hispanic community in America. While Governor, what kind of policies and practices did you see that could lessen the kind of impact that it's having on these communities?
Well, one of the first things that I did, I can tell you when I did it in my chronology of things, I put $10 million into a fund to provide defense money for indigent and poor people that couldn't afford to hire attorneys. And I want to tell you, they went through it like that. I signed into law the Capital Litigation Fund that provided the funds for capital defense. It was more than 10, it was $35 million, and it was used exclusively for capital cases, the biggest percentage of which affected minorities. But it was a drop in the bucket. And I don't think that there's any more money put back into that fund, and especially now with states having the problems that they're having with their budgets. But that's one of the things I did.
And some people argue that criminal justice policy has to go beyond just the judicial system. It's also involved like how you develop communities education system, even like promoting green space. I mean, there's all type of different kind of practices that can be used that go beyond just a court system.
Right. Jobs, creation of jobs. I mean, I was active in all of those areas. It did what I could. The first year I passed a $12 billion infrastructure package for the state of Illinois. But that was at a time when our state had revenue growth the first year I was governor of about $1.3 billion. The next year it was about $1.1 billion. And the third year that I was governor, it was about $900 million. Brand new money that came into the state. And I dedicated 51% of all of those new dollars to education. And we built thousands of new schools. I went to one of the poorest communities we've got, East St. Louis, Illinois. We built 9 brand new schools in East St. Louis, from kindergarten through high school, with those funds that we were able to generate. Then, of course, the last year, the revenues just, and that was not true, and it's true all over. We've got a budget deficit when I left of about, they're claiming $5 billion. I think it's probably more like 3.5, but it's a terrible deficit, and every state's got the problem. So the areas that are going to suffer are going to be the social issues. The people that need it the most are going to be programs that are going to be cut, and I don't know what you do about it other than raise taxes, frankly.
Thank you.
Hi, Governor. My name is Elizabeth Goldschmidt. I'm a student at the college here. You voiced one of the reasons that you are opposed to the death penalty is because you say it's racist in its effect. I was wondering what your views were on systems such as mandatory minimum sentencing that tends to be racist in effect because it has harsher penalties for crack cocaine use than for powder cocaine.
Well, a large percentage of the people in, at least in Illinois prisons, and I'm sure it's all over America, are really nonviolent kinds of people. They're there for possession of small amounts of drugs, selling drugs of some fact. But mandatory sentencing is not good. And I was guilty of a bill we called the Class X bill. 10 years for certain things, you know, maximum. The judge had no leeway. You go into jail, you commit this, your third crime, you go to jail. California's got a terrible law that says 3 strikes and you're out. Some guy got convicted of shoplifting some tapes and he went to prison. He's there for life. And the United States Supreme Court just said that was okay. Just the last couple of weeks, I think, a month. But mandatory sentencing, I mean, we have judges that should have the discretion. You should say, give them a range, but you shouldn't say, this is the only sentence you can give. They don't leave enough flexibility. I don't think. I mean, maybe there ought to be, of course, that's part of what the system needs to be looked at. That's another part of it. The system isn't just involving the people that go through death row and are convicted. It starts with the cops in the streets. I like to refer back to my friend Anthony Porter, who was kind of a nuisance to the police and was probably in trouble because he was retarded, and to survive, he probably did a lot of things. He probably stole, was a nuisance to the police, and they figured this was an opportunity to get him off the street. And they got somebody to say that he was a guilty person, and they threw him in jail, convicted him, and almost executed him. But the whole system, clear through to the Supreme Court, people that spend 20 years making an appeal on a process in this country with no results is just wrong. It's just wrong. One fellow that I pardoned totally spent 20 years. And the appellate division just kept saying they either put it off or referred it to someplace else. And in the end, they'd always said, well, you've got one last place you can go, and that's the governor. Because they didn't want to let somebody out of jail that had been there for 20 years for a crime he didn't commit. That wasn't the case. And if he'd been there, he must have been guilty. So the whole system really needs to be wrung out, frankly.
Thank you.
Let's let this be the final question, and then we'll let the governor make a few closing remarks. Please.
Hi, I'm Karen Klinger, Knight Fellowship, MIT. Advocates of the death penalty often point to it as a deterrent to crime, yet Massachusetts is an example of a state that hasn't had the death penalty for decades, and yet it has a notably lower murder rate than many states that do have the death penalty. Do you see a correlation between the two? Do you think it's a deterrent?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's any deterrent at all. I could use the case of this fellow that I talked about, Gary Gowger, that got accused of killing his parents. These folks were in a motorcycle gang out of Wisconsin that plotted their murder in Wisconsin, but came to a non-death penalty state, by the way, came down to a death penalty state to commit the crime. Now, if that had been a deterrent, they would have said, you know, we're going to commit a robbery and do these kinds of things. Let's go where we're not going to get the death penalty. It never even dawned on them, or they never even thought about it. I don't think it's a deterrent. I can't see where it is. I think, well, first of all, my theory, and I'll probably be chastised for it, but my theory is that most people are God-fearing. They're passionate. They're compassionate about other humans, and they have feelings. And for somebody to commit a murder and horrendous crimes, they have to have some problems upstairs. I don't think they can be, when I read about this Corkialis case, when I read about it, a normal human being couldn't do to another human being what these fellows did to that lady they grabbed. It's not normal. So those kind of people wouldn't care whether you had a death penalty or not. They're going to do what they want to do. So it's not a deterrent, and it's also, I guess, maybe a reason those kind of people shouldn't be executed. A guy like Anthony Porter had no business even being tried under the death penalty provisions. You know, in Illinois, we got 102 counties with 102 county prosecutors called state's attorneys. And they make the decision every day about who's going to be tried under the capital system of death. And 2 years ago, Chicago was the murder capital of the world, 660 murders in 1 year. 2% of the people that were caught were tried under the death penalty. That meant 98% of the other criminals that were involved in it didn't pay the death penalty price. The case with Anthony Porter, he got the death sentence. When they caught the real killer, he got 40 years in prison. Where is the justice? Where's the fairness? I mean, it's a system that ought to be right down the line. It ought to be a strict system that's fair for everybody. But the prosecutors get to the point where they get so far out on a limb, it's us against them, and they get tunnel vision, and they forget sometimes what their job is. And they say, we got to win this case at all expense, and we don't care. And so wrong people get convicted and sent to jail to die. I don't know if that's their intent, but once they get into the heat of the battle, it's always a case about how pleased they are. It's like a basketball game or a football game. They say, geez, we won. They come to the cameras after it's over. Justice was served. We won. Both sides. So the death penalty needs a lot of attention, and it's a very serious problem that we have in America. And it affects the people that are least likely and least able to defend themselves and need the help that we don't provide. And you folks here and all over this country need to be more involved in it. It's one of those issues that we have to get thinking people to think about and be involved in. That's my mission and my charge to all of you tonight. Thanks very much for letting me do that.
Governor, it occurs to me you're not the first Republican from Illinois to take a historic stand on civil rights. We thank you for your generosity today and with your time here at the Kennedy School and this evening at the ARCO Forum. And we thank you for your service to Illinois and your continuing service to our country. Thanks very much. Yes, I think we are. We'll make sure that happens. We're going to get our Illinois picture up here.